Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's Project Phoenix Tabletop Summary webinar. Today is Friday, June 26th, and it's about noon, so I think we will get started. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Allison Prater. I'm the Disaster Recovery Grants Coordinator for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and I'm the project manager for Project Phoenix. I'm really excited to talk to you all today about what we've been working on. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. This presentation is being recorded. Attendees are currently in listen-only mode. You can drop your questions in the chat, or you can wait until the end of the webinar when we'll have some Q&A time. QR codes will be used throughout this webinar, so be ready to scan them. And any other links that you may need or information that you may need will be on the Project Phoenix website, which I will go over. So today, we've got an hour to chat. We're going to go over the Project Phoenix overview, kind of tell you a little bit about the project in case you're unfamiliar, how we designed Project Phoenix, and what our goals were. Then I'm going to go into the summary of the tabletop findings. We hosted 6 tabletop sessions related to Project Phoenix in the spring, in April of 2026. So I'm going to go over what we have gleaned from those conversations. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's disaster recovery resources. We have a large repository of resources related to Project Phoenix and disaster recovery in general that are available for all of you to use. So I'll talk to you about accessing those and how they can be utilized in your own programming work. We're hoping that this Project Phoenix group can be a type of regional cohort that is responsible for protecting economic resiliency portion of disaster recovery. So we're hoping to have regular updates and regular resource development over the rest of the summer and into this fall to help you all prepare for the 2026 hurricane season. All right, so just to provide some context, I would like to remind everyone about the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. We were founded in 1962 with the mission of providing a forum to foster communication and collaboration. Today, we are one of 10 regional planning councils across the state of Florida. We serve 6 counties from Citrus County in the north down to Manatee County in the south. We cover 23 municipalities, 3,879 square miles of land, and over 4 million residents. We provide technical assistance across a variety of program areas, including emergency management, economic development, resiliency planning, and hazard mitigation. Project Phoenix is an especially important project because it kind of has one foot in that emergency preparedness and then one foot in that economic development programming. So it straddles between those two. Okay, so I will start my project overview. This is the QR code for our Project Phoenix website. If you're interested in following along with some of the resources and the background that I'm going to be talking about, you can also access the project website by going to tbrpc.org/Phoenix or phoenix.tbrpc.org. Either of them will lead you to that website. So Project Phoenix is funded by the Economic Development Administration, part of the United States Chamber of Commerce. And it included some wonderful partners such as Critical Integrated Solutions and Frame Production Company. We are grateful for their hard work, dedication, and commitment to this project. We also relied heavily on local government staff, first responders, local small businesses, and community partners across the Tampa Bay region, all of which we are so grateful for. Project Phoenix has been going for a long time. It originally started back in 2009, and we are now on the 3rd iteration of this project. It's a growing and iterative process that we continue to refine and improve with each iteration. So it began back in 2009 and convened a bunch of regional stakeholders to kind of put forth an extensive planning effort and scientific modeling to create a catastrophic plan for the region. So to look at a worst case hurricane scenario, which was named Hurricane Phoenix, and kind of analyze the regional response, look at ways in which response could be improved, look at resource allocation, and really understand how we would manage that type of catastrophe. There was a video in the 2009 iteration that was showed at the beginning of this day-long convening or this day-long planning effort in order to increase realism and get participants to understand how severe Phoenix could be. In 2020, the second iteration of the project, we expanded the project scope to have more of a small business focus. We included real footage and small business interviews from the 2019 Hurricane Michael that impacted Mexico Beach, Florida. Unfortunately, because this project occurred in 2020, we were unable to host the tabletops because of COVID. So we did a train the trainer webinar instead to try and teach local governments and other organizations on how to use the Project Phoenix materials to train small businesses that they're in contact with or organizations that might need to prepare for hurricanes. And now in 2026, we are on the final and third iteration of the project. We replicated this project with small business stories and footage from our region from the 2024 hurricane season with Hurricanes Debby, Helene, and Milton. And we were able to host the tabletops in this 2026 iteration. Like I said, there were 6 of them that occurred back in April. Okay, so I also want to emphasize kind of the why of this project. I know that many of us on this call are familiar with what natural disasters can do to our communities and our livelihoods. FEMA estimates that following a major disaster, roughly 40% of small businesses will not open. And 3 years later, 75% of businesses without a continuity plan will also fail. This has huge ramifications for economic growth, workforce, domestic product, lots of different economic indicators in our region. And Project Phoenix exists to kind of change this narrative by increasing small business resilience. It acts as a bridge between traditionally silo sectors of emergency management and economic development in order to reduce recovery timelines and economic impacts of disasters. So Phoenix exists to enhance the resilience of the Tampa Bay economy in the face of natural disasters by preparing our small business community for a worst case scenario. Project Phoenix began with a question. So what would happen if a Category 5 hurricane were to directly strike the Tampa Bay region? How would our communities and small businesses fare? How long would recovery take? What resources and partner coordination would be required? And what are our collective priorities as a region? What steps do we need to take to ensure long-term economic resilience after a disaster of this scale? And so, like I said, we created Hurricane Phoenix, which is a fictional, worst-case Category 5 hurricane making landfall in our region. And we modeled the effects of this hurricane. We used storm parameters through NOAA's SLOSH model, which is their sea, lake, and overland surges from hurricanes model, to estimate what the storm surge and the parameters of the storm would be. And then we also used FEMA HAZUS loss estimation simulation software to look at the damages county by county, and we can see how many structures would be in harm's way. We can see what percentage of the county would be without electricity and kind of start understanding some of those damage and loss of critical infrastructure impacts as well. The reason that we went into such depth with the storm parameters and the damage estimations was to ensure that participants in these tabletops had a common understanding of what Phoenix could look like without having to experience that disaster firsthand. So instead of thinking about ways that they've been impacted in past disasters, we really wanted participants to kind of come to this level of understanding and have a really common narrative and framework so that they could have discussions that really improved this worst case scenario. You'll see that Phoenix could bring up to 21 feet of storm surge in some low-lying areas. It would have 150 mile an hour sustained winds with gusts likely higher than that. And most of the buildings in the counties, up to 30 or 40% in some counties, would be severely damaged or destroyed. If you're interested in seeing the Hurricane Phoenix storm surge levels or wind impacts for your region, you can view our wind and surge tool on our Phoenix website, or you can scan this QR code here, and it will take you to this map where you can put in a very specific address, location of your home, location of your business, maybe your office, and you can toggle between storm surge and wind gusts to see the impacts that a Category 5 hurricane could have on your region. So we then took this scientifically modeled Hurricane Phoenix scenario, and we created a series of videos to visually display the severity of the impacts of Phoenix. We have 5 videos in total for the 2026 iteration. The first one simulates the hurricane making landfall, and the other 4 detail local official and small business recovery stories after the 2024 hurricanes. So we partnered with WFLA, a local news station, to use familiar newscasters and anchors. We employed real storm damage footage from previous Florida hurricanes. And we showed recognizable landmarks such as the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, all to increase realism of these videos. I want to emphasize that our intention was not to scare, but to incentivize proactive planning. Many small businesses do not make a recovery plan until after damage has occurred to their property or their business. And we have done a lot of research showing that a realistic video and interview stories of people who have gone through the recovery process can motivate people to action before the next disaster without having to experience it. So that's kind of the mentality behind these videos to make planning more at the forefront of people's minds. So if it's all right with everyone, I would like to quickly play the trailer for the videos.
Newly formed Hurricane Phoenix is now a Category 1, but it's expected to rapidly intensify.
The updated forecast track now shows Phoenix moving towards our viewing area.
This is an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation.
We want entire structures break apart and blow away. We're going to stay with you as long as we can.
Okay, so that first video is jarring. The hurricane simulation video is quite jarring, but the other videos, the other 4 that I mentioned with the small business recovery stories from our region, they convey messages of community togetherness, local support, and the value of being prepared. So you can definitely check these out. They're all available on that Project Phoenix project website, or you can see them at the Tampa Bay RPC YouTube page. So moving on to the second part of the project, the tabletop sessions and the information and findings that we gleaned from those conversations throughout the county. Last spring, we hosted 6 full-day tabletop sessions, 1 in each county in our region, to create space for small businesses and emergency managers to coordinate recovery efforts. For those of you who don't know, a tabletop is a trusted emergency management technique. It's a discussion-based, low-stakes simulation in which participants walk through hypothetical disaster scenarios to test and refine their response plans. So throughout the exercises, we utilized modules that followed a timeline of 1 day, 1 week, 1 to 6 months, and 1 year following landfall of Hurricane Phoenix. For each module, our team followed the same series of steps. First, we would show the corresponding video to increase realism and develop a common understanding of Phoenix's severity. Next, we would remind participants to review the situation manual for more information about damages and critical operations at that point in time. And finally, we facilitated discussions between emergency managers and small businesses to test their capabilities, challenges, or priorities at that point in time of recovery. And we were able to have some really, really awesome conversations that kind of pointed to the fact that maybe emergency management doesn't have the best understanding of what the private sector is dealing with in hurricane recovery, And maybe the private sector doesn't have the best understanding of how hard our emergency managers are working and how much they need to coordinate in a hurricane recovery of this scale. Here are some more photos from the tabletops. Attendees included local government staff, such as planners, elected officials, risk and resilience officers, emergency managers, first responders, small businesses, chambers of commerce, economic development councils, and nonprofits, such as Red Cross or Goodwill. One of the really cool elements of these tabletops was that we allowed each county to select their own guest speaker. And it really allowed us an interesting insight into the community character of each of our counties. Counties chose anyone from an emergency management director, like you see Matthew Myers down here from Manatee County. And then some counties chose somebody more from the economic development side to talk more about the economic aspect of recovery. And some counties even chose a small business as their lunchtime speaker because they wanted to hear from someone who has experienced these storms and been able to resiliently recover from the storms. So it was really, really interesting to see all these different lunchtime speakers and kind of see the nuances in each of our counties throughout the region. And every part of the tabletops was designed to drive at these 4 objectives. Right. So objective 1, increase small business and business organizations' understanding of how local governments respond to hurricanes and how recovery proceeds. Objective 2, improve communication between local governments and the business community. Objective 3, increase emergency managers' understanding of the problems small businesses face before, during, and after a major hurricane. And objective 4, identify ways to restore economic and business activities to a healthy state and to develop new businesses and employment opportunities that build an economically resilient community. So all of our discussion questions, all of the simulation, all of the modeling was in order to improve these objectives at the tabletops and have discussions surrounding these objectives. So we are currently in the process of compiling after action reports from each of these tabletops. We'll have one after action report for each county, and then we'll have a regional kind of overview that sums up similarities and differences between the counties. And once complete, these after action reports will provide a roadmap of recommended actions for both small businesses and emergency managers to make further progress on these objectives. They should be available by the end of the summer. And we also pulled out, like I said, those overarching regional themes that existed across all of the tabletops. And I'd like to spend some time going through some of these regional examples of things that we have found are important in economic resilience and economic disaster recovery in our region. For the ease of explanation, though, I'm going to go through them one by one and provide some examples so that hopefully they stick with y'all a little bit better. So the first regional theme. Community recovery depends on small business recovery. This is obvious from a workforce and economic standpoint. But what really surprised us was the cultural and emotional value of small businesses for our community. This woman here, this is Morgan Sunderberg. She owns Keen's Cattle Company in Crystal River. It's a restaurant in Crystal River. Despite sustaining damage from hurricanes Idalia, Helene, and Milton, Morgan was able to open the doors to her business well before other small businesses in her community. She actually is very proud of the fact that she did not lose a single employee throughout all 3 of these hurricanes because she was prepared to kind of sustain that continuity of operations despite receiving heavy damage. And what we heard at the Citrus County tabletop was we heard stories about how her restaurant provided a sense of normalcy for residents. That fostered community cohesion and opportunities to socialize and coordinate recovery efforts between community members. It also provided a home base for residents without access to food, power, water, or air conditioning, really underlining that our small businesses are important for so many reasons beyond the economic ones, and that allowing them the capacity to reopen after these storms quickly and efficiently can be good for the community cohesion, and mental health as a whole. The second regional theme that we pulled out is that emergency management and economic recovery remain loosely integrated throughout the region. And this is especially true for long-term recovery when we're talking about that 6-month or 1-year timeline. Pasco County is a great example of this. So despite a significant increase in the Pasco County labor force and business establishments in the past decade, their labor force has increased by 38% and business establishments have increased by 45% in the past 10 years. Despite these two benefits, more than 100,000 residents still leave Pasco County for work. And so in the tabletops, we realized that if Hurricane Phoenix were to occur and wipe out a significant portion of the housing stock in the county, Pasco has concerns about residents permanently leaving. If their house is destroyed and they don't work there, they're kind of lacking those ties to stay in that community. And so it's really underlining the fact that workforce development and economic opportunity need to be integrated into emergency management protocols to well in advance of a storm to prevent these large-scale economic shocks from occurring and to increase the resilience of the community. The third regional theme is that information gaps persist in the business community. The best example of this, I think, is in Pinellas County, our most densely populated county. They have roughly 100,000 people signed up for their automated early warning system, Alert Pinellas. In 2024, they sent close to 472 notifications. But despite such robust information sharing capabilities, small businesses that attended the tabletops still reported struggling to receive or find the information that they needed in Pinellas. They said it was like drinking from a fire hose, just way too much information and not understanding which sources they should go to or which sources were reliable. So optimizing communication channels to the business community and integrating small business training into emergency management protocols is vital for a speedy recovery. Deborah Shaikowski, the woman in this photo, she's from the Pinellas County SBDC, and she provided a wonderful business continuity training presentation during our lunchtime speaker. And it was a perfect example of the type of resources that Pinellas County has. And so thinking about how to get that information into the hands of the people who need it most, it is really, really important. And I think that emergency management should be included in this effort to protect that economic side of recovery. The fourth regional theme is that communication channels must be optimized and routinely practiced. I touched on this a little bit in the last regional theme when we were talking about information that needs to reach the small business community, but I also think that this is particularly true before, during, and after a storm as well. So Hernando County is a good example of this. They're in a very unique position of needing multiple crisis alerts. So on the west side of the county, where you see the color in this map, that's their storm surge risk, right? That's where the storm surge would come in the west immediately with a Category 5 hurricane. But what's really interesting about Hernando is due to the green swamp, right, and due to the significant rainfall that we would likely see with Hurricane Phoenix, they're also going to be threatened by flooding on the east side of the county, riverine flooding, that would occur almost 2 weeks after Phoenix made landfall. So we had a super interesting conversation at the Hernando County tabletop about how to warn and communicate with businesses without electricity on that east side of the county. So Phoenix comes through, the storm surge happens, utilities are wiped out. Does emergency management have the ability to communicate with businesses on the east side of the county to let them know that that riverine flooding is coming? Both Hernando County Emergency Management and Hernando County Economic Development Departments mentioned that creating printable flyers to distribute at points of distribution and commercial corridors were vital in case electronic communications were down in the instance of Phoenix. The fifth regional theme is that public-private partnerships are a major recovery asset. Public sector and private sector can really help each other during the recovery process. We heard reports across all the tabletops of small businesses assisting with staging resources, debris removal, or even search and rescue in some instances. But my favorite example is from Manatee County. On the left, you'll see a photo of Silver Surf Resort on Anna Maria Island. The hotel received 7 feet of storm surge in Helene, and the owner, Angela Radaker, she's here in the blue polo. She was left with an extreme amount of sand on her property. She actually had to pay $50,000 or close to $50,000 to get it removed from her property after the floodwaters receded. And when telling her story at the tabletop, the emergency management director, Matt Myers, here in the purple, he said, well, if I had known that you had hotel rooms available, if I had known that you had hotel rooms where we could, stage resources and relief professionals, either from FEMA or Red Cross or the county or the state, we would have removed the sand on your property for free. And so understanding that private sector has things to give the public sector in recovery and the public sector has things to give the private sector, understanding those relationships and forming those relationships in advance of a disaster can be a major asset for both groups involved. So these discussions were really pivotal in kind of understanding how both parties can help one another and work together to recover faster. And then the sixth regional theme is that long-term economic recovery requires participation before disaster strikes. At Hillsborough County, we had a really interesting presentation about the emotional states of recovery from the county's recovery coordinator, Rob Tabaris. He talked about how mental health impacts have exhausted our region since the 2024 season. And he talked about how making critical safety and recovery decisions in some of these low emotional states is incredibly difficult. So without the right mental health recovery tools prior to a disaster, or without the right plan prior to a disaster, it makes coordination, partner coordination, and decision-making in a state of stress or grief that much more difficult. And so that's why it's really, really important to build relationships now and develop recovery plans now, because it can ease the speed of recovery and the difficulty of recovery throughout this entire whole year-long process and multiple anniversary reactions. The other part of this regional theme is that small businesses were rather hard to get to the table. Hillsborough County reported also struggling to connect with small businesses about emergency preparedness, and understanding that long-term economic recovery requires plans and preparedness and understanding of the business community is pivotal to our community recovery as well. Okay. Finally, I'm going to move on to the third part of the webinar where I talk about some of our regional resources, which are available to all of you. So this QR code connects to our Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council public SharePoint. And on our SharePoint, our Project Phoenix SharePoint, we have an iterative and growing list of resources from all of the 3 project iterations. Our hope is that other organizations, private, public, nonprofit, in the Tampa Bay region will use these resources to host their own small business tabletop sessions. Project Phoenix is scalable and replicable. It can be used by any jurisdiction, it can be used by any organization, and it can follow any timeline. For example, you don't have to do an entire day tabletop if you don't have the capacity to do that. You could maybe just look at 1 or 2 modules. You could maybe make it virtual. You can maybe have shorter discussions or discussions over multiple days. So these are some of the resources. First off, the 2026 and 2020 video series files are all available on our SharePoint for you all to use in training or in any capacity that you might see them beneficial. We also have all of the tabletop PowerPoint presentation slides that we use at the tabletop sessions. They're left blank in some areas to ensure that they are a customizable template for your organization, and you can put in the information and rearrange the slides as you need. We also have the tabletop facilitation guide available. So this will kind of tell you the logistics of hosting a tabletop, important do's and don'ts, thinking about the room layout or the inviting participants or whether or not you should have food, just different little tips and tricks that we've learned after hosting these tabletops. We also have the participant situation manual, which breaks down the actual scientific modeling of Phoenix, the damage estimates, the power outages, and it goes across those 4 module timelines to show you what Phoenix impacts look like at different points during recovery. We have access to all of our logos and our project icons. We have county evacuation zone maps, one for each county that we've made. I showed you the Hernando one earlier, but we have all the other counties as well. We have our surge and wind impact viewer that I talked about earlier. We have a repository of small business resources. So small businesses who are looking to update their continuity of operations plan or develop a disaster recovery plan, or maybe they're looking for resources to recover. All of that information is in one repository within our website so that, you know, small businesses have everything kind of all in one spot rather than looking at those disparate outlets. And then finally, we have started creating some social media resources for the region, which I will talk a little bit about on the next slide. Here we go. Yes, so this is an example of some of the social media campaign resources that we've been working on. Obviously, communication, especially communication between local government and small businesses, was a huge point of conversation across these tabletops. And so we wanted to design resources that could be utilized by anyone in the region. I mean, they could be utilized by a local government emergency management, local government communications department. They could be utilized by chambers of commerce, economic development councils, manufacturing associations, or they could be utilized by nonprofits, church groups, and relief organizations or academic partners. Most of them are designated at small business recovery, but we have some that are more general about making a plan or preparing for hurricane season. We also started creating some one-pagers. We've got one-pagers that kind of go through tips for small businesses to prepare. And we're working on these contact sheets for small businesses that has all of the important numbers in their county listed. We're hoping that small businesses can print these out or get their hands on these and have them ready to go in their disaster kits so that they're not relying on internet access in the event of a disaster. And then finally, we started testing out our mascot here. This is Phil the Phoenix. It's very similar to, we wanted to follow the lines of kind of Smokey the Bear. We wanted an educational mascot that represented Hurricane Phoenix, and using a friendly, recognizable character has multiple benefits for the community. Number one, it can lower anxiety and make difficult topics like a massive hurricane more approachable and more digestible. Having a mascot like Phil can also drive long-term recognition and retention in the community. So every time that we see Phil, you know, we're hoping that everybody thinks preparedness, preparation, hurricane season is coming. And finally, Phil can transcend cultural and language barriers. And again, that recognizable face. And so we're starting to integrate Phil into a lot of our social media resources as well. And we hope that all of you will use him, that he will be kind of the face for preparedness, small business preparedness in our region. So that being said, that is everything that we have today. I hope that all of you will use these resources and will use this Project Phoenix framework to update your own disaster recovery programming, to communicate more with small businesses, and to start thinking about that long-term economic resilience and revitalization and how we can start those processes now rather than post-disaster, rather than post-landfall. like I said, we're hoping to build a cohort. So if I have your email list, if you got the email about this webinar, you are included in our cohort and you will continue to receive updates from me. If you don't believe that I have your email, feel free to shoot me a message and I can make sure that you're on that list. I will be sending out notifications closer to the end of the summer, letting you know, okay, social media resources are live and available, or perhaps that the after action reports are done live and available. I want to ensure that we are building an economic resilience cohort that can discuss how to protect our small businesses and our economy from disasters. Like I said, this project is iterative too. So if you have any comments, suggestions, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me via email, and I'd be happy to discuss those with you and happy to incorporate your thoughts and opinions into the resources that we're developing and make sure that they're a really replicable and usable resource for you all. So thank you again for joining. We really appreciate it. And like I said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.